Corbin Welles understood every word of Spanish his new caregiver spoke. From the very first morning she arrived at his front door, soaking wet from the Vancouver rain, one hand gripping a child's backpack, and the other clutching a piece of paper with his address written on it. And what she said when she thought he couldn't understand would eventually cost two people their freedom, save a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and break open a heart that had been sealed shut for 3 years. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. The numbers had been bothering Corbin for months. Small things at first, an expense report that didn't quite add up, a vendor contract renewed without crossing his desk, a partnership agreement with a name he didn't recognize, tucked into a stack of routine filings his CFO, Drake Garner, had placed in front of him with the casual confidence of a man who expected no questions. Corbin always asked questions. Drake had smiled and explained everything smoothly, the way he always did, polished and prepared, and just slightly too comfortable for a man who should have been nervous. Drake had been with Welles Biomedical Group for 6 years. He knew the company almost as well as Corbin did. He also knew Corbin's ex-wife, Bianca, a fact that Corbin had always filed away without acting on, the way you file away a small crack in a wall and tell yourself you'll look at it later. He was looking at it now. The problem was proof. Whoever had been moving money through those vendor accounts had been careful, meticulous, even, and Corbin's internal audit team had come back with clean results twice. Something was being hidden. He just couldn't see where. His doctor had the answer to a different question entirely. After 3 consecutive nights of Corbin working until 4 in the morning, his physician had been firm. 2 weeks at home. Not optional. Corbin could rest or he could have a cardiac event before his 42nd birthday. The choice was his. Corbin went home. He also, on the advice of his personal assistant, agreed to hire a live-in caregiver. Not for himself, that felt absurd, but because his mother, Adela, had been recovering from a hip replacement in the east wing of the house for 6 weeks and needed more consistent help than the rotating schedule of part-time workers had been providing. Someone full-time. Someone who would live there and take care of things properly. He approved the hire over email without reviewing the application. That was the first time in recent memory that Corbin Welles had let anything slide past him unexamined. Lucia Vega appeared at his door on a Tuesday morning in November, when the rain was coming down sideways and the mountains had disappeared entirely into cloud. She was 27, small but not slight. There was something firmly planted about the way she stood, like a person who had learned early that the ground might shift and had decided to hold her position regardless. A girl of about 8 stood beside her, wrapped in a bright yellow raincoat that was doing absolutely nothing against the weather. "I'm Lucia," she said, when Corbin opened the door and looked at the two of them without speaking. "And this is my sister, Camila. I was told she could stay with me while I worked. I hope that's still all right." "It is," Corbin said. He stepped back to let them in and went back to his office without another word. He didn't catch the look Lucia exchanged with Camila once his back was turned. He didn't need to, because a moment later, in rapid, lilting Colombian Spanish, Camila whispered to her sister, "He's very tall. Why does he look so unhappy?" And Lucia, shaking rain from her jacket, replied in the same language, "Because rich men always think being unhappy is a personality. Take off your boots." Corbin, halfway down the hallway, felt the corner of his mouth move. He said nothing. He kept walking. Somewhere in the disciplined machinery of his thinking, a small and unexpected thought surfaced. Nobody had been genuinely funny near him in a very long time. The first week was careful and quiet. Lucia took care of Adela with a kind of competence that didn't call attention to itself. She was there when needed and unobtrusive when not. She prepared meals, managed the household schedule, and kept Camila occupied without letting the child's energy disrupt the silence. Corbin moved through, like it was structural. She greeted him each morning in English. She asked no personal questions. But she talked to Camila constantly, and she talked in Spanish, and Corbin understood every syllable. He understood when she told Camila that Adela was doing better than the last caregiver's notes had suggested, that the woman was stubborn but sweet underneath it. He understood when she reassured Camila that yes, they could stay here for a while, that this was a good job, that they were going to be okay. He understood the weight behind the word okay, the way she said it like a small prayer rather than a statement of fact. What he did not understand, not yet, was why her saying it made something in his chest feel slightly less calcified. It was during the second week that Corbin noticed Drake's visits had increased. Drake had always framed his check-ins as personal concern. He was Corbin's oldest colleague, practically a friend. But there was a new frequency to the visits now, and Bianca had come with him twice. She had no business relationship with the company after the divorce settlement. She had no reason to be in Corbin's living room, handing him a cup of tea with her studied warmth and saying, "I'd just worry about you, Corbin. Let us help carry some of this." Lucia watched from the kitchen doorway during the second visit. Corbin was near the window, listening to Drake outline a restructuring proposal that had appeared, fully formed, from somewhere outside the normal channels. His eyes were on Drake, so he didn't see what Lucia saw. Bianca's hand, briefly, resting on the small of Drake's back. Not the touch of a business colleague. Something else entirely. After they left, Lucia went back to the kitchen and stood at the sink. She said quietly, in Spanish, to Camila, who was drawing at the table, "That woman is performing for an audience of one, and the audience is herself." Corbin, passing the hallway, stopped walking. He stood there for a moment outside the kitchen door, out of sight, and felt the very specific sensation of a puzzle piece dropping into place. He resumed walking, but his mind was running at a pace his body was supposed to be resting from. The documents arrived the following Thursday, delivered by hand in a formal envelope that Drake set on the desk in Corbin's study with a flourish of professionalism that felt rehearsed. Share transfer authorization, voting rights restructuring, a new stakeholder agreement attached to a holding company called Garnet Pacific, a name Corbin had never heard, with a registration number he would later discover routed through 3 shell companies before ending up in a personal account. "The board has reviewed it," Drake said. "It protects your interest in the event of continued health complications. You don't want the company exposed to instability while you're on leave." "I'll have my lawyer look at it," Corbin said. Drake smiled. "Of course, take your time." He did not expect Corbin to take his time. That was the afternoon Lucia came in with coffee. She set a cup in front of Drake and one in front of Corbin, and when Drake reached forward to helpfully flip the document to the signature page, "Just so you know where it goes," the coffee cup that was meant for the side table ended up across the desk in one smooth, quiet motion that looked exactly like an accident. Dark liquid spread across the signature pages in a long, definitive bloom. "Oh, I'm so sorry." Lucia was already reaching for paper towels, pressing them down firmly, making sure the damage was thorough. "I'm so clumsy, let me— oh no, the whole stack." Drake stared at her. "That document took 2 weeks to prepare." "I know, I'm so sorry, I don't know how." "We'll bring another copy," Drake said, his voice controlled, his eyes not particularly forgiving. After he left, Corbin sat alone in the study. He looked at the coffee-stained papers. He looked at the door Lucia had slipped back through. He was a man who had built his life on reading situations correctly. He read this one without difficulty. That evening, while Camila was doing homework at the kitchen table, Lucia stood at the sink and said, almost to herself, in Spanish, "Somebody in that office is stealing from him and those two are helping. I just don't know how to prove it yet." Camila looked up. "Are you going to get fired?" "Probably," Lucia said, "but not today." Corbin, standing in the hallway, leaned his shoulder very quietly against the wall. There was a particular kind of loneliness that came with running a company. With being the person at the top of every decision tree, the one everyone performed their honesty through before delivering it. He had lived in that loneliness for years and called it focus. He had mistaken isolation for discipline, distance for strength. He understood that now with a clarity that the noise of the office had never allowed. The proof came from an unexpected direction. Lucia had a cousin, Rosa, who worked as a paralegal downtown. After photographing the documents on the desk, one phone, careful photographs, done in under 4 minutes while Drake and Bianca occupied Corbin in the living room. Lucia brought the images to Rosa. Rosa brought them to a securities lawyer she trusted. The lawyer called within 48 hours. Garnet Pacific held 51% of voting shares in a restructured version of Welles Biomedical. It was owned by 2 people. One was Drake Garner, The other was Bianca Welles. If Corbin signed, he lost his company, not partially, entirely. Lucia sat in her car outside the legal office with that information and breathed in and out for a very long time. That night, after Camila was asleep, Lucia was in the kitchen with a cup of tea. She was on the phone with Rosa, speaking in rapid Spanish, her voice low. She didn't know Corbin was at the far end of the hallway, awake, having gone to get water. "I know what I found," she was saying. "I just don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. He doesn't trust me, why would he? I'm not his advisor, I'm his housekeeper. He's not going to listen to me." A pause. "No, it's not that. I'm not Rosita. Stop. It's not about how he looks, that's not what I'm saying." Her voice dropped further. "I'm saying that I watch him in the evenings when he thinks no one's paying attention, when he sits by the window after dinner and looks at his son's drawings on the refrigerator. And there's something there that has nothing to do with money or companies. Something that's just a person who is very alone and doesn't know how to stop being alone." She was quiet for a moment. "I feel like he is drowning and nobody around him is telling him the water is rising. That's all. That's the only reason I care." Rosa said something. "Don't you dare start with that," Lucia said, with a short, involuntary laugh. Corbin did not get his glass of water. He went back to his bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark. In the morning he called his lawyer, and then he called his son. Nico arrived on Friday afternoon, 9 years old, carrying a backpack with a hockey stick strapped to the outside. He walked into the kitchen like someone had told him there might be snacks and he was there to verify. He found Camila at the table working on a poster for school and stopped in the doorway the way children do when they spot another child unexpectedly. A brief recalibration, then immediate acceptance. "Is that for a project?" he asked. "Yeah. Do you want to help? I have too many stickers." That was the end of their introduction. Corbin stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched his son laugh at something Camila said, watched the two of them trade stickers with the serious commercial energy of seasoned negotiators, and something in his face shifted so completely that Lucia, coming from behind him with a basket of laundry, nearly walked into him. "Sorry," she said, stepping back. "He hasn't laughed like that in months," Corbin said. He wasn't talking to her, really. He was just saying it out loud. Lucia set the laundry basket down. She looked at Nico. She said quietly, "Children know how to find each other. The rest of us forget how." Corbin turned and looked at her directly for the first time in days. Not the supervisory half-attention he'd given her since she arrived. Actually looked at her. "How long have you been raising her?" he asked. Lucia met his eyes without flinching. "Since she was 4. Our parents died in an accident on the highway to Kelowna. It was just us after that." Corbin was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry." "So am I," she said. "But she's doing well. She's really doing well." She picked the basket back up and walked past him. Corbin turned back to the window. Nico and Camila were laughing again about something neither adult had caught. He went outside and sat with the children that afternoon. Just sat, in a lawn chair, watching them play some complicated invented game that required several rule renegotiations per round. At one point, Nico tried to explain the rules to him, and Corbin actually listened, with the same focused attention he brought to board presentations. Nico seemed startled, then pleased. Then he kept talking for another 20 minutes about variations they could try. Lucia watched from the kitchen window. She didn't have to say anything. She already had, in Spanish, to a sister she thought was the only one listening. Drake and Bianca arrived the following Monday with a new set of documents and a deadline. The patience was gone from their approach now. There was an edge beneath Drake's professional exterior, something tight and overdue. He set the papers in front of Corbin and said the offer from the acquiring party had an expiry. Sign now or the deal collapsed, and the resulting instability would be bad for everyone. "Including you," Drake said, not a question. Bianca touched Corbin's arm. "We're just trying to protect you the way we always have." From the hallway, Lucia heard the scrape of the folder being pushed closer. She went to her room, retrieved her phone, and set it to record. She walked back to the hall, placed it carefully behind a ceramic planter on the console table. One phone, one location, close enough to the open study door, and went quietly to the far end of the corridor. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and waited. What she heard in the next 12 minutes, she would later describe to Rosa as people who had forgotten that being audible is a choice. Drake, convinced the deal was almost closed, grew expansive. He talked about the timeline for the sale. He mentioned the projected personal return. He said, with the easy contempt of a man among allies, that Corbin wasn't going to fight it. He'd been on stress leave. He didn't have the fight in him. Bianca said Corbin had always been better managed than he realized. Drake laughed. Bianca laughed. Corbin, who had not picked up the pen, who had been sitting with his hands folded, and his face completely neutral, listened to all of it. Then he looked up. "Drake," he said, the same tone you'd use to get someone's attention in a meeting. "I think we should speak honestly." Drake started to say something reassuring. Corbin spoke in Spanish. "En realidad," he said slowly and precisely, "lo entiendo perfectamente." The silence in the room lasted long enough to be remarkable. Bianca went completely still. Drake's expression moved through several versions of itself before settling on something that wasn't quite any recognizable human emotion. Corbin reached forward, set the unsigned documents to the side, and placed his own phone on the desk between them. The recording app was running. "I understand perfectly," he repeated in English, for completeness. "I have for quite some time. Not just the Spanish, everything." He looked at Drake directly. "I sent a copy of this conversation to my legal team 9 minutes ago. The documents Lucia photographed last week have already been reviewed by a securities lawyer who will be filing a formal complaint with the OSC on my behalf tomorrow morning." Drake stood up, his chair scraped back hard against the floor. "The company is not for sale," Corbin said. "You're welcome to leave through the front door." Neither of them said anything meaningful on the way out. The front door closed hard and the house went quiet. Lucia was still sitting on the floor in the hallway when Corbin came out of the study. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "You heard all of that," she said. "I heard all of it," he confirmed. He sat down on the floor across from her, his back against the opposite wall, with the loose-limbed quality of a person who has been carrying an enormous weight and has just in the past 4 minutes set it down. "How long have you understood Spanish?" she asked. "My mother is from Medellin," he said. "I've spoken it my whole life." Lucia closed her eyes briefly. "The first morning, when Camila said you looked unhappy." "And you said rich men mistake unhappiness for a personality," Corbin said. A sound came out of Lucia that was not quite a groan and not quite a laugh. She put her face in her hands. "You were very accurate," he said. "I thought about it for days." She lowered her hands. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the controlled distance of the boardroom version of him, not the careful guardedness she'd observed from the kitchen window. Something open, something that looked, honestly, like relief. "The late phone call," Lucia said, "with Rosa." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "What did you hear?" "That you thought I was drowning," he said, "and that you cared for reasons that had nothing to do with the job." He paused. "I heard all of it, Lucia." She looked at the floor. Her face was warm. "I'm going to need a moment." "Take your time," he said. She looked back up. He was still there, same place, watching her with the same expression. "I can't quite tell if I should apologize," she said. "No," he said, "you shouldn't." Drake Garner was formally charged with securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty 7 weeks later. The investigation Rosa's lawyer had initiated moved quickly once the recordings and document photographs were submitted as evidence. Bianca was charged separately for her role in the Garnet Pacific structure. The paper trail was too clear to argue around. Corbin's legal team said it with the quiet satisfaction of people who appreciated clean evidence. Corbin went back to the office in January. He walked in on a Monday morning looking, by all accounts, like a different version of himself, still precise, still demanding, but with something unclenched about the way he moved, something that suggested he had remembered, somewhere in the past 2 months, that he was also allowed to breathe. Lucia didn't leave. That had been clarified quietly, carefully over the weeks between November and the new year, in the way that important things get clarified between two people who are both trying to be honest without rushing anything that isn't ready to be rushed. Nico came every second weekend, and then every weekend, and then started leaving a drawer of his things in the spare room because it was easier. Camila appointed herself his unofficial academic advisor. She was 6 months younger and considerably more organized, and she felt this gap should be corrected. Nico accepted the supervision with good-natured tolerance. The house was louder than it had ever been. Adela, recovering steadily, said it finally sounded the way a house was supposed to sound. One evening in late February, Corbin came home from a board meeting to find the kitchen in a state of managed chaos. Lucia making her mother's sancocho on the stovetop, Camila and Nico doing homework at the table, while talking simultaneously at a volume that suggested neither was actually listening to the other. Adela in the corner with her tea and a very satisfied expression. Corbin stood in the doorway. He had stood in a lot of doorways in his life and watched things happen without him. From a remove he had always told himself was efficiency rather than fear. He had been wrong about that. He knew it now in the way you know something when it has finally stopped being abstract and become simply, obviously true. Lucia turned from the stove and saw him. "You're home early," she said, in English, with the comfortable ease of someone who knew exactly what she was saying. "Meeting finished," he said. He walked into the kitchen instead of past it. He sat down at the table, between the chaos of the homework and the warmth coming off the stove. He didn't pick up his phone. He didn't check anything. He sat there and let the room exist around him. After a while, quietly in Spanish, he said, "I heard you tell Rosa you felt like I was drowning." Lucia didn't look up from the pot. "I remember." "I was," he said, "and I heard you say there was something there, beneath the rest of it, a person." Lucia stirred the soup. "There still is," she said in Spanish, not turning around, "in case you were wondering." "I wasn't wondering," Corbin said. "I already knew." Camila looked up from her homework at Nico. Nico looked back at her. A silent, significant communication passed between them at speeds unavailable to adults. Adela quietly finished her tea. Corbin reached across the table and straightened one of Nico's scattered papers and asked him what chapter the worksheet was on, and Nico told him, and the evening went on the way evenings do when a house has finally figured out how to be a home, loud and warm and ordinary and exactly enough. What did you think of Lucia and Corbin's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story.